All right, guys. Okay. Sorry, I just got a notification of some kind. Okay, so all right, today this is one of my favorite days. What we're going to be discussing today, and you're going to learn. Well, you're going to learn probably what I think is one of the most important and yet overlooked. The date is wrong on today's meeting. I'll have to change that. Well, one of the most important and yet most overlooked aspects of software development. Something that we as developers, as programmers, we tend to hate this. We tend to just really not want to deal with this thing at all, this testing thing. And there's a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of reasons for why programmers do not like testing and do not like testers. But I'm in a rare position that I actually got my start in software development as a tester. That my initial, I knew generally about software development. I knew how to write code, but my undergraduate degree and my masters were not in software. They were actually in hardware and in electrical engineering. And so when I got my first job many years ago, I was actually hired as a tester to do what you will learn was called black box testing. And the reason why I was hired was primarily because I was not a software developer. And what they wanted was they wanted somebody to test the code like a non-programmer would test the code. Because part of the problem is that we as programmers, we tend to test there's some special words for these things. We tend to test what's called the golden path test, which means we test it because we test it the way that we know it's supposed to work. And then what happens is all of our test cases pass, and then we feel so confident that our code is working because it passed all of our tests, so it must be working. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn a little bit about testing, and I'll walk you through how to write some tests for a simple code. Okay, so actually one thing, let me come back over here. I think it was exceptions. Because I realized that one of the things I left off a few weeks ago was toward the end of the exceptions. Toward the end of the exceptions thing was about assertions. All right, yeah, there it is. Okay. Let me go ahead and so that's chapter 12. I'm going to open up chapter 12 here. Okay, so we'll pull up over here. Yeah. Sorry if I jump around a lot on this. There's a whole lot. In fact, this topic, the topic of testing in general, it is, it could be its own course. Really, it's so important and so large. It's such a large topic that it could be its own course. And so really, you're just gonna get the very surface level of this in today's lecture. Okay, so one of the ideas as far as how Java executes tests, all right, is the concept of an assertion. Okay? Now, an assertion is basically it's a Java statement that you can assert something that should be true, okay, or assert an assumption that you think should be true. Now, if the whatever it is, if the thing, if the assertion, the Boolean expression, if it's true, then what will happen is the program will basically just skip over it. Okay. it will just jump right on over it. Okay. If it's false, it'll generate basically an exception. Okay. And what can happen, what this can do is this can kind of act like an if statement for an exception, for throwing an exception. It doesn't throw a special user-made except programmer-made exception. So it's not that you are throwing. You couldn't use it to throw an exception for like your assignment, like for the assignment 2 that you guys have right now. You couldn't use it for that purpose, but you can use it as a form of debugging, right? So as things are going through, you can, if something is out of whack, if something's not right about the way the program's running, you could have this be used to be able to stop the program so that you can fix whatever the problem is. Or if, say, for example, if a certain condition is not true at a certain point, it would cause errors later, then you can stop the program there so that it doesn't continue on and do error-prone problems. Okay, so basically the idea is you have this assertion, right? Assert whatever the Boolean expression is. So the assertion is a Boolean expression, right? Or you can have it in this format, the whatever the expression is, and then give it a detailed message. Okay. Now, when an assertion statement, so when we are executing our code and this statement is encountered, okay. Well, first of all, it's going to check and see, okay, is our assertions even turned, right? So were assertions turned on? If they are, then if it is false, if whatever that expression was false, then an assertion error will be thrown. It will throw its own error. Okay. If it's true, it'll just skip over. All right. Okay. We can give it our own detailed message to tell us specifically what's the problem, what's going on. So we have an example here. All right. So here we have a loop where we're adding up the numbers from 0 to 9. Right? You should hopefully know why I never becomes 10 inside of the loop. The loop ends once I is 10. So this is true, right? So this should be true once we get there. All right. So we have this assert I equals 10, and if that's true, we just skip over it. Nothing happens. It's like as if the line isn't there at all. But because this is true, so because this is true, this we skip over it. Here, the second one is not going to be true. I think, right? What's going to be sum 0 through 9, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. You know what that is? It's going to be 55. Okay, so anyway. So this is true, right? Sum is greater than 10, and sum is less than 5 times 10. Oh, nope, that's going to be false. So true and false gives me false. So this Boolean expression will be false, and I will get this message thrown as an exception. So let's skip over to there. Let me see. Chapter 12. Thought I had this as an example over here. I guess I don't. Okay. Well, Eunice, I'm right. Let's find out. Okay, so are you able to see? What are you able to see right now? Oh, you're right. You're right. It is 45. All right, let's see. Are you able to see the Java screen right now? Anyone? Okay, good. So let's go ahead and write this in, all right? And what I can do is I can not there. I think actually I ended up with an extra closed curly brace. All right, let's see if this is right. Okay. Oh yeah, so it doesn't do anything. Okay, so let's do one thing. Let's add that. Okay. Let's add that. Compile it. All right. Hey, it didn't do anything again. Wait a second. You know what? I know what I didn't do. I turn on assertions. Where are you? Let's see. Ah, there's enable insertions. Enable assertions. So there's that, and because assertions are enabled, it should give it to me this time. There it is. Okay. All right, so for you JGrasp users, you're going to have to enable assertions. I'm not sure about IntelliJ or NetBeans. Unfortunately, I don't do assertion stuff in those IDEs, so sorry. All right, so when we run it here, right, we get this problem, right? It's not really a problem because the reason we're using this assertion is we're trying to say if there's a problem, I want it in the program here, and I want to say there was a problem rather than continuing on. And it's kind of a quick way, instead of having to throw new exception and all that stuff, it can be for something that can act sort of like a debugger. Okay? And then what you can do is, for example, maybe you want to tell our user some stuff. Okay. So what we can do is we can say, okay, I want to run this, and I want to run it in a situation where I know if a problem comes up, but I might say, you know what, that's just for me to know. That's not something I want my users to know. So if I take that, if I disable assertions, right, then I can still run it, right? I can still run it and skip over these lines. You can't do that with exceptions. You can't do that with like throw new exception. If I were to say if I equals if I doesn't equal 10, throw new exception, I can't disable that. Okay. But here I can enable and disable this. So let's give an example here where this will be true, where this will be true, and then this will be false. So I want to generate this assertion here. All right. So here, notice now this one was true, so we skipped over it. This one was now false, and so it tells me my little special error message here. And it ends the program, it gets out of that program and all that. So notice back up here, my assertion error gave me no special message, nothing. It's because I didn't have a special message here. This assertion error gave me a special message, right? But again, I can disable those and just run it straight away. Okay. All right, so that's my example. Let's see. Let's see. So again, let's see. What else do I want to say about this? Okay. Now, one thing about the assertion and exceptions and stuff like that, assertions, we don't use those to replace exception handling. If there is some error that exists in the code that, or sorry, let me say this. If there is some potential error that could happen, for example, a divide by 0, if we ask the user for two numbers and we try to take the division of those two numbers, and the second number is 0. We don't want to let that happen. We don't want to try to divide that. Right, we should have that be an exception because that doesn't make sense. Divide by 0 doesn't make sense. Okay. So we don't take assertions to replace the exception handling. You know, assertions are just saying along the way, is the certain condition, is my certain condition that I'm looking for, is it correct? All right. Okay. So that's how we use assertions as far as in the code. Now, what I said is what we'll get to when we get to testing itself, when we get to writing test cases, is that the assertion is kind of part of the foundation of a JUnit test case. And we'll talk about how to write those and how to assert things on that. So far, all we've talked about is using the assert keyword to say, is this Boolean condition true? If it's true, do nothing. If it's false, generate an error. Okay. All right. So that's assertions. Right. That's assertions. Let's talk more specifically about testing. Okay. So in Java, we use JUnit as kind of the basic framework for a test case. Okay, so we're going to use the JUnit suite to be able to write test cases to confirm that our code does what it's supposed to do. All right. So here's an example. Let me show you an example. Okay. We can write a test. We can give it a test case is simply a method. Okay. All right, it's just simply a method. We can name it anything we want. I'm going to talk in the second hour. I'm going to talk about naming conventions, some possible naming conventions of how you might want to name your test cases so that they make more sense. Okay. And basically what a JUnit test suite, when a test run is going to do is it's going to one by one go through these tests, go through these methods and run them. Okay. When it runs this, if an exception is encountered, that will count as a failed test case. If an exception is encountered, it will count as a failed test case. If the method runs to the end and nothing bad happens, right? I shouldn't say nothing bad. If it runs to the end and no exception is encountered, that will count as a pass test case. And it's pretty simple, right? If my method runs to the end, pass test case. If my method stops by finding an exception, failed test case. Yeah. That's going to be very important when we start talking about how to test certain situations, how to test certain things. Okay. All right. So we write all of our methods. It runs them one by one, not in a specific order. You might think, oh, well, this one's M1, this is M2. It's going to run M1, then M2. That's not always the case. Sometimes it runs them in different orders. Okay. Setup, we can use the setup method, and then there's another method, a teardown method as well. But a setup method that can be used to kind of initialize objects, to set them up for use, like if you maybe want to have some variable or array list that you want to use in all of your test methods. It's kind of a starting place for all of your test methods. That can be used for that. Okay. All right. The way that we can run the test from the console using this JUnit core, what you'll see when we'll do it through JGrasp. If JGrasp knows that a file is a JUnit test case file, it'll give us special compile and run buttons that I'll show you in just a moment. Okay. So here might be an example of we're testing an array list. So we're testing the array list example. So remember, we have an array list. We add items to our array list. And then we can test using this assert equals. Now, assert equals does not work like the double equals sign. Remember that for strings, we can't just say, does it double equals, right? Does Beijing double equals, some other value over here? It says, do they have the same value? Okay. So here in this example, if this equals this, if this has the same value as this, that's a true statement. And so this assertion does nothing. So this assertion generates no exception, and it just moves on. Here, we add 2 more items to our list, and we're checking, is Hong Kong in the last position in the array list? So both of these, we're just checking, does this string equal this other string value? This should be true, right? And so therefore, this should generate no exceptions. I want to show you this as an example of how you write this, right? I want to show you this as an example of how you write one of these test methods. Right. So that you can understand how to. By the way, I do not suggest having 2 assert statements inside of the same test method. And the reason why is because if either one of these were to fail, for some reason, how do we know which one was the problem? All right. If either of these were to fail, we would not know which one of these was the problem. Okay. Here we can also test deletion, where we basically have a search. Is the list empty? We can add some items to our list. We remove an item, so we've already checked, because this tests our ability to add items to the list. We know we can add items to the list, and that's fine. Here we're testing, can this item B be removed from the list? We know it's in there. Can we get it out? And we want to make sure that 2 is the same as the size of the list. Now notice that this assert equals, it can take a string, a pair of string parameters. It can take an int and another int as parameters, and it's the same method, but they're overloaded, right? One takes 2 strings, one takes 2 ints. You can also have 2 doubles, but as we'll see, putting 2 doubles in there is not suggested. So this is the basics of how to write a test method. A couple of things I want to point out, and you'll hear me as we start walking through doing some of these in just a moment. I don't like the way that they've used 2 assert statements in the same test. I don't think that that's a good idea. Second, I don't like the names of their test cases. I think that, well, I'll just show you. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Is there anything else I want to go on here? Nope. Well, this is another example, but you can look at that on your own. Okay. Let's look at that test array list. So is it in here? Where were you? I thought I had it in here. That's not it. Don't I have a test array list? Oh, this is different. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just do it as a new one. All right. So we're going to, I'm actually going to do a new file. You know what? Okay, it doesn't like, I don't. Okay. I'm going to show you how to do something real quick so that I can go over this array list example, because I do want to go ahead and go over that example. All right. Imagine you have a Java file, let's say like your assignment 2 or your upcoming assignment 3. All right. I want to create a test suite of my file, of my class. I can even do this with an empty class like you see here. If I click on this create JUnit test file, it's going to create its own JUnit test. Notice that the compile, the run, and the debug buttons are all changed now, right? So it knows that this is, JGraphs knows that this is a test file. Okay. Now, one of the neat things that it's going to do, one of the things that it's going to show me here is it's going to create this thing called a default test that always fails. You should delete this, otherwise you will always have a failed test case. All right, and that's you don't really want that, right? Now notice that this takes different parameters, doesn't it? Than what was the example on the slides. We can give our own message of what to say if this test fails if this assert equals is false. Okay, and notice that we give a 0 and a 1 because 0 does not equal 1, so this will definitely fail. Okay. So if I compile this, yeah, so I get my same as always over here, and if I run it, I will get this, oh, default test. Expected 0, but was 1. So it tells me what my expected value was, 0, what the value was, 1. All right. Those are not equal. That's why this assertion error happened. That's why this test case failed. All right. And then it gives me my special message right here. You know, default test added by JGraphs. Delete this once you have added your own. Okay. So I can delete it. If I just change this to 1, I'm going to show you what happens when you have a passed test case. Nice little green color here, right? Tells me my test case was passed. All right. So notice no special messages, no messages because this test case didn't fail. There's no reason for it to tell me any special messages. All right. Okay. So we will follow their instructions and we will delete this. We will get rid of our failed test case. All right. Let me go ahead and copy my array list test. All right. So I can compile it. Should work. Oh wait. Oh, I don't know why. That should work. Okay. So now we completed that. We compiled it. Now we've run it. And both of my tests passed as we expected because Beijing was the first item. Right, B was removed. All right, so but I want to know how do I make sure that the test will fail if a problem has occurred? So let's take a look at this. Let's say this. We're going to add Beijing with a lowercase b, and then we're going to see does it equal. All right. So when I run this, I should get I got a failed test case, right? Expected Bayesian with a capital B. Notice it expects the thing that I'm giving first, but it got something else. So we put the expected value first. We put the value we're testing second, right? And that's going to interpret this. Does it really matter which one we put first, which one we put second? No. In an assert equals, it does not matter. Okay. But notice that these were different, right? These were not the same. Okay. So we have one test failed. Now if I change this back, and let's say I do this instead. And if I run it, notice again, I get the same test failed. Now this time it tells me what my expected and obtained, what my expected and gotten, received values are. All right. Okay. Helpful information, but notice that here we have two test methods rather, and one of them fails. Now, really, though, we have 4 different assert statements that we're passing through to get there. really we're making 4 different tests here. And this is why, for me as a tester, I say don't put more than one assert statement into a test case generally, because this really represents multiple tests in one, and we don't know which one of these is really the problem. Okay. All right. Before we take our break, let me also tell you about the other thing that I said I didn't like. This method name. Just do not like it. Do not like it. Right, now here's the reason. Is for one thing, what if I wanted to do 2 types of insertion tests? What if I wanted to have a test of inserting one value, Beijing, and then I do another testing of inserting more than one thing? What do you think will happen here? What will happen here if I try to run this? What do you guys think? Okay, compiler error. Why is that, Rajat? Right, because these methods both have the same name, right? It's going to tell me, hey, you can't do that. We already defined that method with that name, right? Remember, this is just a Java. This is just a Java file. That's all it is. All right. So what I do, yeah. So now I have 2 test cases that are both testing a similar kind of thing, insertion, but now they have 2 different names. And by using this format, this 001, 002, I can also kind of combine them. So imagine, let's say this was a general test, or maybe this was a test of the first class I'm testing, like for your assignment, for example. Maybe I'm testing the department class. Then I can say, okay, and then for the course class, I'm going to make all my test cases like this. All right. So I'm going to renumber them all this way. All right. Okay. Let's see something. I'm going to copy this. Let's take this out. All right. See if this works. Oh, okay. So we went ahead and cleared the list out afterwards because I went ahead and did start the list out every time as an empty list. Okay. All right. Okay. I was thinking something else was going to happen, but so again, one thing is imagine that I wanted to try to, let's say that, I don't want to say this. Let's say that we had a situation where it was not, where we didn't do something right. Maybe we didn't remove it. Okay. This should generate a failed test case for us, right? Because this is not correct. The reason why I was testing this whole thing about is the list empty without clearing it first is because I think in earlier versions of JUnit, because these methods would be done out of order, that this list would get whatever values were in it. And so when it got to this method, for example, it would already have all these things in it. Right? It would already have all these things still in it. All right. Okay. All right. Let's see. So we'll have some more discussions on testing in general. I did want to go ahead and kind of give a bird's eye view of what testing is and kind of how to write some JUnit test cases. We will do another example here in the next hour after the break, where I'm actually going to have an example of code we might want to write here or a class we might want to write here and how to test it, right? And how to create some test cases to make sure that it is doing what we expect it to do. Okay. All right. So let's take our break now and we will come back in 10 minutes. So at 2:27. All right. I'll see you in 10 minutes.